When I was in an environmental science class in middle school, I watched a documentary about the abuse of sea life, SeaWorld, and all that. But the scene that stood out to me was one where a person, I think a rescue worker, watched a dolphin swim over to them, rest in their arms, and close their blowhole to die. Suicide is completely antithetical to life, which only exists to exist. Even the most abused and destroyed life forms on this planet persist to live because living is literally objective. Whether animals abuse for show, humans dealing with the violent and terroristic forces that destroy cultures, the fucking state of our planet rotting and the people having to live under that, or the horrible branches nature can take to preserve itself, life is a neutral force, but the will to live makes our bodies disturbingly resilient. The suicide rate in the US, amongst men and women, has been steadily increasing since the 90s, especially spiked up since the pandemic and the growing loneliness pandemic if you include other countries like India and Japan. There's a chance it's also rising in other countries too, but I do not live in them, so I can't speak on them. There are dipshits who like to debate the attempts deaths bullshit, and I think all of those people should. The point is that people do not like living in this world. And since the beyond point after ending a life is so intimidating, even when the alternative seems preferable, there's always the question of what if there's nothing. Depression is a result of the brain not producing enough chemicals for itself to sustain motivation. It's not a sad or tired expression, but a lack of feeling, a lack of will to feel. There isn't a clear reason for why a person falls into a depression, since every person builds their brain uniquely, and since the brain never really stops developing, each person will have a different reason to lose that will. When life stops being thrilling and becomes obnoxious and tiring, slowly the dopamine, which pushed you onward, dries out. It all just feels like the same dread. Nothing ever gets better. Nothing ever changes. When left to its own devices, under the noise of technology and the abuse of everyday people, the distance between that closed blowhole isn't so far off. Have a Nice Life's Death Consciousness is a masterclass of dense atmospheric noise, post-rock, ambience, and philosophy. The poetic temptation in Deep Deep. The chorus itself asks Jesus Christ, why is love itself so lonely? That through the pain of the world and the violence of humanity, why is our refuge in love and compassion equally as compassionless? And asking that, it does give the answer, but the song doesn't come from a place of genuine questioning. As the album cover shows, the singers in their own bloodbath, trapped in their own depression. The punk outfit was composed of Dan Barrett and Tim Makuga. After their hiatus, the two members would go on to different projects. Makuga to The Flowers of St. Francis as a noise super album of parts following Death and Peace. Barrett moved to Giles Corey and later Blackwing. On another note, both also collaborated with the punk DIY project Gate.
Open wide the gates of hell and come forth from the abyss by these names.
I'll save that for another day. Giles Corey was the title for Barrett, and their debut album came out in 2011. The dingy image of London during their deep plummet into smog amid the Industrial Revolution. If you buy the CD, you get a book which contains some. I don't have the book. I don't have anywhere to put it. So while I was collecting footage for this video, I found out that the digital download comes with the PDF. I mixed it up with the deconstructionist file and thought they were the same. My mistake. When I say in the video that I don't have it, ignore it. Not that it matters. I listened to the album years ago before I knew there was an additional book full money back guarantee.
Conga time.
So I'm just gonna go over it now. It also comes with lyrics, so I'll be using it to save time in the booth. It's essentially a tie-in novel that goes with the album, particularly about the influence from Robert Vore, explanation for the album, along with various poems and images that tie in the haunted motif. Plenty of them are famous ghost images. The Ghostly Bride image, I caught that one instantly. Each chapter follows the tracks and through that explores the themes through a mixture of prose and poem, along with cryptic little phrases along with some of the images. You know that House of Leaves shit the hipsters are into? Check this out. Whoa. For real though, this collection is interesting. I'm going to lace the pieces in with the songs in question. You'll see as we go. I'll try not to spoil too much of it since it does come with a purchase, but I also can't help myself. This is far too fascinating. When I brought up Deconstructionist booklet in tandem with this one, I should note that Deconstructionist is a lot less poetic and more prophetic. Hence my tone when referring to it, and honestly I just don't like it as much. The novel follows a mixture of biographies, anecdotes, and poems surrounding both the album along with the fictional life of a figure named Robert Vore. The tracks are divided as The Ghost, where the chapters are labeled as The Lie, with 2 additional chapters in the PDF along with an afterword. The later print of the album shows the figure wearing a Vore's head device. Good luck researching this fucking thing because my only source is Dan Barrett through his booklet read to me through a bucket of Jake. It might not exist. Apparently the device is supposed to allow you to communicate with the afterlife. Well, we'll get back to this. The other noteworthy thing isn't just the album name, but the project name. Salem was a town amid the American colonies within the province of Massachusetts Bay. The New World was still quite new to the British colonists. For many reasons, Salem fell ill to the panic and paranoia of this new world. Whether it be the Native Americans living on the island and still, not wanting these fucking colonists on their bay. The distance from England, along with the typical religious dogma that plagued Europeans since birth, and especially King William's War, which raged across New England. Also, disease from bad bread, though that was everywhere in colonial America. The mixture and paranoia, possibly from bad bread, started to create paranoid tensions and delusions amongst the villagers starting in 1692, again during that war. I will come back to this, but for now let's focus on our main character, Giles Corey. Described as not caring for the community and being scandalous, which could mean anything. No, he murdered someone in 1675. Giles Corey was married to a woman who fell victim to the trials, Martha Corey, who was accused, tried, and hung in March 1692. Corey initially stood by the crowd, but recanted his statement in the courtroom, and the gang all came together, ignored him, and killed her. American pastime. A month later, Salem accused Giles of witchcraft, and he refused to participate. And as we all do in situations like this, the village pulled up their rage and hatred for this man. They proceeded to lay him down and stack heavy boulders on him one by one. His last words, crushed down by the rocks, was just a whimpered, "More weight," before he died of suffocation after more rocks were put on. It's a bizarre and dark piece of American history. One of those twisted moments where the worst possible situation could have occurred, and we got to see the darkest recesses of human behavior. Also, it's kind of funny. The origin of the project and album came from the booklet Barrett included, where he tells a story of putting on the Vore's device and in his state heard sounds of dead voices calling to him. In the manifesto that released with 2016's Deconstructionist, Barrett writes that people listening to that mixtape should cover their hands, feet, and head while listening to induce a hallucination out of sensory deprivation. In other words, Barrett could have experienced something out of this in the same way Salem's sickness led them to believe not only in witchcraft, but a corporal punishment for the population of Salem that were on the outside, an attempt to obtain catharsis through violent punishment, including Giles Corey himself. In Barrett's words, Giles Corey brought death to himself and brought the violence of the village. While I can't confirm the story itself, the album was inspired by a suicide attempt, along with some breakdowns on tour that later inspired Deconstructionist. I'll get to that one too. Giles Corey, the album, would take elements of folk, atmospheric drone, gloom, and noise to create this brutal orchestra and mood of despair, because that is, for the most part, what the album covers. While this video will dive deep into these intense subjects, the subgenre itself that it sprouted from is also quite interesting. I call this subgenre self-loathing folk, though Midwest emo is a better name for it.
I wanna get stuck in traffic every day. And I wanna pay $3 grand in rent.
It was popularized out of American football, the early DIY indie punk scene, and Warped, which was good for connections before it became a generic corporate Woodstock parody. Pat the Bunny,
I'm mean and bitter and a failure at everything that I say I believe.
Harley Poe,
I don't know what I'm thinking, but I wanna have fun. I wanna get fucked up till the hurt goes away, but I always feel like shit when I wake up the next day.
Andrew Jackson Jihad,
I am not a courageous man. I don't have any big lasting plans. I'm too cowardly to take a stand. I want to keep my nose clean.
Days and Days,
Will die, sweep your skeletons off to the side. I'm oh so sorry, swear I've tried to be.
and plenty more have popped in to write songs of woe with thick reverb and harsh guitar strums. I don't know if they came out of Have a Nice Life or out of similar folk or acoustic scenes. However, I do know that while swimming through this kind of depressing music, I was brought Giles Corey, and I think they're the best at it. It took me a while to get into the album. It was September 2020, and I was still recovering from the dread of that. But I did love it. It wasn't until depression hit me hard in December, and for the next 3 months, that I listened to this album around 100 times before I decided it was one of my personal favorites. That was a period of time where I would spend my entire day in bed watching YouTube videos, cat on my leg, or going on my laptop to write, only to play solitaire on Windows as a distraction. Many albums in this subgenre attempt to incubate that sensation of abandonment, misery, and distortion that comes from severe depression. The projection that comes with being locked by your worst thoughts, being unable to conjure up emotions other than contempt, sorrow, and dread. My issue with a lot of these albums, even if I like a couple of them, is that it comes off as self-centered. Depression can culminate in that, but in my experience, depression and its misery is out of neglect, not entitlement. When a person stops feeling a connection with themselves and others, when they become deprived of what they enjoy and the social validation of others, they reclude. They lash out. Barrett took inspiration from the immorality of execution. I think what puts the two together is the isolation and the death in the will to proceed. Corey wasn't executed for his murder, but was ostracized, and that inability to cooperate with the villagers during their most delusional was what singled him out. I don't know enough about Barrett to say anything here, but suicidal temptation comes from feeling alienated and unable to integrate amongst humanity. It's when you truly lose faith in your fellow man and your ability to be human. Why is the album named after Giles Corey? Hinterkaifeck and Deconstructionist kind of have fitting names. While I assume it's due to the allusion to the Salem trials, the delusions brought upon the villagers during the Massachusetts winter the pilgrims weren't accustomed to, and perhaps a social fracture that led a village to crush a man by boulders as punishment for not playing along. Giles Corey is a 9-track album about isolation, depression, hauntings, and hatred. It's a deep dissection of the misery that comes out of loneliness, out of a world that is relentlessly inhuman for us, that whispers encouragement to lean into your worst temptations and punish those who fall into it. It's a dense and depressing album that doesn't paint itself in irony, contempt, or humor. It simply is. Its use of atmospheric neofolk brings out a wide forest of hauntology, being trapped in your own mind prison, and whispers hedonistic thoughts to you. The harsh guitar being strummed hard enough to tear the tips of fingertips, the soft vocals of suicidal temptation through the album, and the screams early on in the opener and the 7th track. The project started as a country project, but evolved more into folk and embraced a much darker tinge. Since I'm going to go deep into the headspace of suicide and depression, both of which I've dealt with in my life, be warned. I also want to point out this album resonates with a lot of people for its intensity, and for that reason, I will be going into more explicit detail. I'm going to really explore the ways people become locked down by the world and fall into these thought loops that become so warm and familiar, the self-harm itself becomes comforting. Neofolk specifically seems to have really been born out of Nico's The Marble Index, which is a pretty interesting album. In modern forms of neofolk projects like Beautiful Deaths in the Woods, it takes on a very lonely sound. Very sparse, echoey guitars played like blues, essentially. Blues and folk music both connect in that they come out of an attempt to express the sadness of reality, an attempt to express a real loneliness in helplessness. A lot of really depressing folk music, even the happier stuff from stuff like the Oh Hellos, always has this tone of loneliness in it. The album cover, depending on whether you get the CD in 2011 or the digital files now, is either of Barrett wearing the Vors device, dirty hand clutched to the bandages and ashy dust. The original photo was a photo of London during the 50s and when lax regulations ejected smog below the upper atmosphere, choking the city in a dense haze that turned the city into a black, silent hill. The entire city turned into a dumpster of factories. Piano keys play slow through a ghostly ambience before the reverb vocals. Occasional chains or cymbals played around the room, echoing off the walls of the cave. Spoken as the Salem villagers as they prophesize Corey's torture, before it swaps over to the narrator as they lament over the nihilism of the situation. No afterlife, no judgment. It repeats. As this dark ambience looms in like a storm as whispers come in.
Is that Mommy?
The bridge whispers a poem as if Corey's refusal to participate, as if his sins make him inhuman. A single harsh drum plays with a cymbal, like a parade of ghosts marching on with the singer whispering these chants. And the chanting is both sickly and visceral. Above the occasional guitar strum, moving away into the ambience, after which comes the chorus, which erupts in a howling choir. The narrator yowls of the dead mind he exists in, screaming. As a zombie living moment to moment, never existing as a soul but an animal, only existing worried in a limbo waiting for their release from the torment of life. The final vocals sing. Repeated that, despite how long we've been here, we all remain unsure of our ending. That we're as broken and desperate as those in the trials, as Corey, as the people they killed. The ending of the song, though slowed down string work and drums slammed down, has Barrett howling in a meltdown with harsh piano key slams, a mental rage as he fails to compose himself to come up with anything, frustrated with life. The ending just has these soft, distant hums singing Breathe On over and over as the piano closes off the, frankly, disturbing fucking song. This recording was apparently another of these lucid episodes Barrett described in Deconstructionist. One he had no memory of, but had the recording of Fury, where he paced around in a fit of misery for an hour. The Haunted Presence is about the looming terror of death, brought not by the natural state of life, but by our fellow man, knowing that we're all at each other's throats, all against our will, It ends slow as the vocalist breathes in and relaxes, pacing through the room, occasionally slamming stuff, before it transitions into Blackest Bile. The introduction involves the experience recorded in the haunted presence. Barrett sits at a piano to record, slips onto the device, and blacks out. He awakens at the end, on the floor, an hour lost to a recording filled with manic noises and frustrations. The introduction includes a similar experience where Barrett awakens holding a knife and crying. He locks himself down to literature, driven to find an answer to an afterlife, dead set on finding it. In the text, he escapes his misery with, desperate to find an answer to his depression. Barrett relays a story in the Blackest Bile section where, as a young boy, after having stones thrown at him by bullies, he fought back after being struck and, like Cain to his brother Abel, struck down the bully with a rock before being split apart, struck back to reality, only to feel empty and grief-stricken after the incident, being clawed off by the person who had just thrown a rock at him. Blackest Bile is about self-loathing and projection. There are two parts of the song. First is a thick mixture of acoustic strings and lighter vocals. The vocals drown in contempt. The narrator sees themselves and their world as only filth and rot. They open up their heart and they're disgusted. They acknowledge that this misery, whether towards a lover or family member, is hard to brace.
And it has been easy on you. I'm just so lonely.
While this beginning is quite beautiful, really love the second half. The drum beat and increase in density for the instrumentals, it almost turns into the same parade from before, though the song almost becomes fun. The doom that emanates around the narrator, the inability to reawaken their sore heart, unable to see their worth in what it can give people. Repeating the chorus again, that they feel ultimately worthless, haunted by their own dread and paranormal to the world around him, that they're locked in their worst ideas. There's a lot of hauntology in the song, wishing to be a person who could get up and persist without the burden of their own apathy. The life they could live in exists in a realm they haunt. Blackest Bile is easily the most relatable song in my opinion, the most down-to-earth in terms of its use of neo-folk drone and atmosphere. Its writing of disdain feels like being locked in your own head, begging your own body to move and act as time runs out, as your moment misses, as you make choices that feel disconnected from yourself. Instead of it being drenched in panic or terror, they feel defeated, trapped in the delusion that they exist only as a floating, amorphous blob of ash, or seeing this blob of ash everywhere they look, unable to see life for what their brain perceives it as, this dullness. I feel like the second part reaches out to the listener and agrees that this darker angle, this entrapment felt by the soul hurts, still accepting that ultimately they'll be stuck in it, left to be alone to the whims of the dark, careless universe. Disassociation can be panic-inducing, but once it settles in, you let it. You become a spectator of your own life, unable to connect your thoughts to your actions. Derealization is worse. when you actively can't believe in your reality, trying to wake up from a nightmare that never ends. Trauma rises out of the throat and gargles like vomit. The harmonies and the humming are emotionless, but also fun to sing along with. The texture of the acoustic guitar sounds harsh in contrast with the overall softer song. The higher notes give the song a lullaby quality to it. I think of all the songs on the album, but this one consistently gets stuck in my head the most. When I'm truly depressed in life, this song comforts my heart, ironically. Grave Filled with Books is a short poem played with sparse guitar strums, choir harmonies that both fade into the abyss and emerge from it, about feeling utterly lost in one's head. Though the poetry is more about the relationship fracture for this person, the narrator lays in their bed as they recount in their head, like a series of books locked in their memory, laid to rest as they move forward. Contemplating what had happened. I feel like the beginning of the song is just trapped in shock. Awe for how fucking miserable the moment is. And then that line comes in. It hits hard at that final line as the song plays out with high-pitched howls. It's hard for me to read whether this is from an X to the narrator or the other way around, but either way, the insignificance in the writing, in the framing to the narrator, leaves them stunned in their grief. It feels remorseful in the realization that their distance hurt the person they loved, and that person is gone. After the song plays out, the guitar chords play again before the album takes a break from the more depressing nature. When I gave the album a listen for the first time, this was the song that really struck a chord in me. I felt the shock in me as that final note repeated. It's like when you're betrayed and all you can do is stare forward as you feel paralyzed by the sting. According to the files, the Epstein files, Robert Vore comes from an ancestry of a prostitute and a hogwasher, a witch and a killer. He was a magician in that he enjoyed playing to the morbid curiosities of the 19th century doggers in Dogtown. An absent mother and a strict loveless father, Vore grows disillusioned by the societal construct of life and death. He toys with the onlookers through his habits merely because he's an outsider and doesn't fall into the societal framework to bite into. Sleep Tapes comes with Empty Churches and involves the transcript for Vore's encounter with the afterlife. In his sleep, Vore speaks with another specter as they both babble incoherently. The voice finds nothing, but knows Vore's there, where Vore cannot find this figure, yet hears them in his slumber. It ends with Vore babbling and sobbing over his inability to traverse this boundary, where the voice speaks vaguely of this immense emptiness, both profoundly stricken with guilt in order to cross.
Voices of unknown origin appearing on radio frequencies were first noticed in Scandinavia by the military in the 30s.
Empty Churches is a strange anecdote about a series of disembodied voices, appearing in a paranormal EVP documentary, apparently. The voices were discovered during World War II, studied, and those voices targeted those who observed it.
The voices zeroed in onto the Swede, addressing him by name, revealing a knowledge of his thoughts and actions.
The discovery led people to find a static scientific explanation, dismissed entirely.
They were confronted at once with living voices, which answered back. The British parapsychologists, without conducting experiments, rejected the objectivity of the voices, explaining them as breakthrough from taxis, police messages, or simply mechanical noises in the tape recorder, and possibly with greater technical resources, they soon found out that they were indeed confronted with voices of unknown origin and taste.
The song is filled with dramatic synths that play like a church organ, strange vocal tics, and vocal harmonies throughout the album. I don't think I truly have the words to describe the song, and honestly, even to this day, despite feeling pretty well on the album, it stands out so hard. Even towards the end, as the vocals fly and warble into the mixture, along with Barrett's own singing, the only legible words from them come at the end.
Before you die, an indication of survival after death. But you didn't take my thing. But you didn't.
As if the spirits from beyond are desperately trying to reach out, but humans are locked in their own realm where the paranormal is impossible. Thus, the explanation is ignored in favor of wholesale dismissal. There's a connection in the voices from beyond being hand-waved as mechanical error, the result of secret war codes, and even down to experimental rounding errors, because despite calls from beyond, the people expect mundane and boring expectations from it. The voice wants them to listen. They try to reach out, but the answer they get isn't enough, or isn't the right one. The experience led Vur to reject science in favor of Sufi mysticism, which is an Islamic form of religious practice. However, the text doesn't really dive into it, and I'm not really in the mood to appropriate a cultural practice I learned about 5 minutes ago, so instead we'll continue. Vur has the transcript, but not the recordings, and became violently defensive about his finding, even to his death. The narrator connects this attempt to reach out, to be heard, to the isolation they feel, that people don't listen to the calls coming from people who want to be heard. I suspect that empty churches is a continuation of the haunted presence. The paranormal phenomenon is shown with no words besides that disappointment that something was found, but instead people and science rejected it as benign. Barrett, having his own experience, probably rejected by the dismissal of the real experience of the people in the study, rather lives in the boring reality they're familiar and in control of. Hence that title of Empty Churches, as people drift away from faith and belief, but as a consequence, the outside shell of that world, contextless from any meaning, becomes disembodied voices spoken to people are merely anomalies. Empty Churches, under this context, becomes a song not about EVP and the connection to the beyond, but the reality that our shared faith and belief is an illusion. The voices we hear are what we want to hear, people trying to contact us, trying to be heard, but are really the voices of people we wish were still around, to speak, to walk, to guide us in the way they do in death. We follow the people who die because they have done what we all will eventually do. I had a pulse in the EVP, EMP, ghost hunting, communication, paranormal studies, and besides a lot of it being pure bullshit, EVPs were the only piece of proof I could latch onto, because it's the physical embodiment of the paranormal. Through radio signals and paranormal tampering, a force from beyond could use the signals to communicate through bites, since the physical and paranormal could not interact. And despite the clear proof of something bizarre, the sample in Empty Churches is dismissed. Through that disinterest comes in both Vur's disconnection to society, his grief in the people not believing of what he's discovered, what he's found, what he connected with, and Barrett's attempt to be heard in his suffering as outsiders looking in, crushed by the weight of society and the push forward to something unattainable for them, crushed by the stones of condemnation. The Vur's device is merely a cloak to hide the person beneath. I believe the album cover is actually a still from The Invisible Man. The images come from old media, annotated with phrases from Barrett, but I don't know what this image is. Just that it was taken, existed at one point, has a person in it, but that person isn't under the image anymore. The old image of London under the smog is drenched in oil vapors and pollution, as was the city under the oppressive smog, but it carried on until it changed to silently choke the planet, trapped under the veil of non-existence. That then is followed by I'm Going to Do It. It's the most intense song, lyrically, on the album, probably the quietest and most refrained song, about suicidal temptation, disassociation, and social isolation from the world outside. That there is no self. sung in deadpan defeat below distant howls echoing behind it like wind, while the guitar repeats dead and tired. Between the verse and chorus comes these strange ambient noises with the voices of people speaking far away, inaudible in the fog. The pre-chorus and chorus bring the guitar back to reality in this self-hatred. It's repeated in a loud orchestra of singing hums and foreboding synths as the production explodes. The irony in being so alone is shared by almost everyone else. The guitar strumming sounds harsh. I feel like I can imagine the fingertips of the guitarist shredding themselves in the realization of this rage, that their depersonalization from this existence, brought with acquired realization, is truly out of hatred for their connection to other people. Their choices, their interests are reflections of the people they see and connect to, and it's ruining your life. The song quiets down to that realization and holds on to it. The singer goes quiet and lets the ambience repeat as the noise takes over the mix. The only noise from the singer is the breathing in the end that it's over. I imagine them staring at their fingertips red from the strumming, that the truth has come out but doesn't feel cathartic or better at all. It feels the same, and it still hurts. I talked about this when I wrote about the body. It was an old video about assisted suicide and that subject, but the channel turned into making videos about the Bible. I mean, I guess that's what they chose to do, but I want to expand on that point. It scared me because I was coming out of a terrible thought tunnel at the time, but that trauma wasn't really ever processed. I mean, I couldn't afford to, and I thought if I just kept pressing on, it would all go away, until it didn't. I feel more and more useless with each passing day, and those thoughts don't go away. And I feel so helpless in this descent. What I appreciated about the idea was that sometimes people don't feel right. I'm not going to preach that we should just let people die if they don't feel good, but if I can press a point, suicide isn't rational. There's grown this wave of preachers who just repeat, "Well, you should keep living," because of how many people feel so dreadful, hopeless, and alone in this terrible world.
Thank you for watching. Never kill yourself.
I can't disagree, but I think that they miss that again. Suicide isn't something people like to resort to. Suicidal ideation comes from people feeling rejected from others, from people losing faith in their participation in society, unable to connect. It comes as a last resort from people who truly don't understand the humanity they have, or the connection people seem to have with other people. They crave to something they can still control. It's how self-harm can happen. Don't get it twisted. No one on this planet is normal. No one knows what they're doing and how they fit in, no matter what they tell you. If they think they got it all figured out, they are lying to you. Suicidal tendencies come not from an escape to paradise, but as an escape from horrible pain, when life gets too hard too quick, when you can't see a future from the present, when you feel trapped and no one can pull you out, because society feels so disconnected from itself. Everyone is sick of each other, and the lowest on that pole are falling off hard. I think just barking at people to keep living is stupid. I mean, I'm glad you're doing well. I'm glad you're doing well. My point isn't that we should let people die. It's that we need to stop pretending suicide is selfish. People who aim to die spend time with their loved ones the final time. They plan out their death. They may even minimize the damage for the people that find them after. That doesn't sound so fucking selfish to me. Suicide is not a selfish art form. It's an attempt for the person to regain some control of their life as they lose their grasp on it, as they lost connection to the only thing they can see. Doom comes as a defense against a world that only seems to hurt, to anticipate the worst so that you don't end up harmed by the alienation. And to get preachy, I despise the statistics that have become this form of power for people. They can see some number that says people die and decide that means they're superior. People who kill themselves aren't lesser. They were failed. They feel disconnected, and the best way to save them is to reconnect them. Through it, he forms the Dark Ocean Society, a cultic worship of the non-existent barrier between life and death. He introduced the Voor's Head device a year later. The few members who remained would engage in meetings wearing the device, deprive themselves of oxygen, and slowly become numb to existence, to deprive the soul, and convert life to a non-existence through journaling and through the device, break the walls of the spectral goal. A process called decontextualization. Interestingly, there are moments that break the divide between the fictional Voor and Barrett himself. The mixture of genuine interest in this concept contrasts with his deep self-hatred to be someone else more interesting. I hope they heard that. That was creepy. Voor believed our lives were made of context. Decontextualization comes from intently separating yourself from your real person through writing and skepticism, writing down your memories and experiences, which removes the hyperpersonal element that comes from the day-to-day, turning your memories and actions into paragraphs. Our reality was simply an interpretation, that life was a glimpse into half of a chaotic paradigm that existed on the other side of that living barrier. Decontextualization, especially involving the Dark Ocean Society, would involve cutting those segments and larger narratives into a disembodied mass of words and concepts, burning away their existence. All that would remain is a version of their life without even them in it, and once they were gone, they would go away. The concept of the spectral goal isn't of a real apparition. The world is haunted all the time, to quote, because everything has already happened. To cut away from the text, I like the moment in OSP's Trope Talk haunting the narrative. There aren't ghosts, but everyone is haunted. I remember during the month of grief, after my mom died, my dad would wake up to find his laundry folded. He swore this was her still doing it, and to be fair, my mom would have done that. She was a spiteful woman. After all the hospice equipment was removed from the house, I would catch him just staring into the empty room, struck with grief. I could still remember that empty room with only an old mattress, old furniture rotting away, and a single sock hanging from the mattress that she hung in her final days. We are haunted by the past that's gone. I have pairs of my mom's slipper socks. We both love those, and sometimes I hesitate to put them on because I don't want them to finally wear out and have to be thrown out. I have a picture of my grandparents when they were younger, one long past and the other under my aunt's care, probably on her deathbed. For close to 10 years, by the way. My aunt's amazing. Sometimes I see my own father and myself when I get angry, even though he moved out of the state a year ago. My sister moved out, and even though her hoard of trash she claims isn't hers is still here, one of the things I miss is her cats. I still expect to see them around the corner. I do miss my sister a lot. I still dream about them, think about them, hear them. Sometimes I hear my mom's voice in my apartment when I'm alone. My personal favorite song off the album is Spectral Bride. While not the only song to devastate me or make me cry, it was the song to bring me to sobbing. Spectral Bride came from suicidal thoughts and the wonder of what would happen to the person they left behind. The vocal harmonies are the thickest here as the strumming is persistent and slow. They call to the Lord, hearing the angels cry, locked down in their own hell, pleading to the above to be heard, to be rescued. They reach out to the listener to hear the torment through their singing, because they see their torment stain the people they love. Their singing speeds up into a more talkative form as they confront their own sadness and suffering. They see their love for this person as the reason to die, to spare them of their self-loathing as they battle with their mind prison all alone. because they see their condition as harmful to the person they love, wondering if they'll get through. The bridge plays with synths and piano together, an added synth trumpet. The fakeness of it has been criticized. Honestly, I think it fits, kind of as a representation of how isolated and disconnected the person is. I don't think real horns would sound better here. The chorus comes after the refrain through careful drums pattering next to the piano. They sing that if they don't make it through the darkness, alone with the isolation to fight off their worst temptations, they'll still be around. I love this song. I think there's something really beautiful that, despite the knowledge that they may not make it, they'll still haunt the person they care about, watch over them, be there in spirit, that they were broken, but at least they were loved and can still love. It's an extremely bittersweet closing to the song, but after such a distressing and disturbing song of temptation, I think it sets in that thought of something after, that they can pass away from the world and still live. It's the only piece of genuine love in the album, and it's still all alone. Our physical reality, Sauveur writes, is spiritually cut off from the wars our bodies have with the ghosts around us. We're always haunted by what came before and why we're where we are. The art they liked, the music they listened to, the movies they watched, and the jokes they repeated. When a person departs, their old habits become something painful. The spectral gall is every one that has ever died. They say a person dies twice. Once when they die, the second when their name is uttered for the last time. By holding on to the oldest tools of our species, the oldest molds of people long lost, the stories told thousands of years ago. Do those people who existed millennia ago still exist? Does Homer still sing those Greek epics? Does Gilgamesh still rule over Uruk? Are the gods the ancient Mayans worship the exact same that they worship today, despite how many centuries have passed? How much these cultures have changed, how much some of them don't even exist in the same way. Despite the fact that ancient Mayans didn't have Facebook, I'm cutting this fucking joke off. Would Quetzalcoatl create a TikTok? Whenever we look back at the works of older figures of the past through their writings and art, do they come back to life for a moment? Death isn't just a shadow that looms around every corner, but a sudden and unfair form of decay that we see in everything. For as much as life blooms across the planet, we have far more symbols and ceremonies for the loss of that life. Can you become that ghost which haunts the people you live through in passing? No One Is Ever Going to Love Me follows that. It was the first song I discovered off the album, paired with various pieces of Midwestern emo, and of them was the edgiest and most fun of them. The synths here are short and plucky. The guitar vibrates in deep hums. Where the prior songs were built in sadness, this one built in anger. The narrator compares himself to an animal, a savage beast that ruins everything they come near. The chorus is sarcastic and deeply bitter about their state of mind. It isn't far from the real mindset of feeling low. Your problems aren't real, so why don't you get over it? They look forward with entitled desires to rule and own. Feeling left behind by the world, they wish to reclaim some fake ownership over it just to spite the world which dehumanizes and hates them. As they struggle to keep up while they are beat down by the world. Note also the mention of New England, as in the new world that Salem formed from, the same state. The chorus repeats twice more. The first is the same, but the second reads as instructions. The narrator treats their cycle of bitter depression as metaphorical crucifixion, walk over the bridge of disappointment and exhaustion, knowing what will come, but still playing through it, being subject to a slow torment as they die slowly, the agony of birth, but in reverse. Trailing into a downward spiral, they can only see themselves alone. After a song of loud guitar vibrato, the song falls into a more folky melody with a fairly upbeat snare, or tom. The catchy melody plays along before the singer belts. Before the song erupts into a loud chanting harmony, brought by the joy of not existing in reality, existing in a dreamland. To be whisked away by the chaos of life with no order, just by the flow of thought, free from the rules, to relax with no expectations, to drift into chaos, to finally cuss out the fucking world and rid yourself of its chains. It is the loudest, blistering reclamation on the album as the sorrow explodes into righteous revenge through strings, bashing drums, and harmonies. Sleep. In recent months, I find myself quite dreadful when I was awake from a pleasant sleep too. What does it mean if we all die anyway? For many people, not knowing can be just as horrible as knowing, so writes the chapter. There's a lot to this passage, as well as the next, but for people in our realm of linear time, we crave knowledge. Vur claimed that the difference between the living and the dead was that the ghosts were aspects of chaotic symbols left behind by that linear life. They do not feel a sure answer or comfort. They exist and we, as living, are forced to interpret. Since everyone eventually ends up consumed by death, fated to rot and be forgotten, what is the point of life? Wells of Despair describes an axis of our perception of the world, between what exists and whether we believe it. We cannot think of things that we cannot accept, but do exist. Likewise, we think of things we accept, even if they don't exist. We conform to deities and rituals, take refuge in numbers and projections, but the will of the universe is neither chaotic nor calm. It's not even neutral to our existence because we cannot conceive of what it is, how vast it is, or how little the pocket we exist in could possibly matter in the grand scheme of it. Even the concept in some large-scale time scale of the universe is our mortal interpretation of what it is. We humanize it, because it's so unfamiliar. The light between the sun and earth takes 8 minutes to travel, but we can still prepare for when sunspots burst and when those rays will contact our planet. The distance between Earth and the Sun is almost inconceivably massive, to the extent that our prediction for how the universe will end can seem almost laughable. To how life evolves in the universe based on how life forms on Earth, which was disturbingly quick, by the way. Inhabitable planet? No problem. Volcanoes. Sleeping Heart, sadly, returns to the quiet meandering instrumentals that come out of these highs, cratering back to a miserable sorrow. Single string plucks, no chords. The narrator writes of their impending death, expecting it soon, and writes in their will to be buried by the school where they worked, and to inscribe the words, "How do I wake your The song is short and to the point. The poem is written to ask how they escape their mentality, to escape the emptiness they feel in their soul, hoping to get the people who live and see it to question their own sickness. It reeks of desperation for the future, but the lack of time comes with acceptance. To leave this world in a way from their suffering, to still leave with something worthwhile to be heard, to come back from the dead ghost they live as something of use. Honestly, this is easily the weakest song. I love it as much as the rest, especially that bell synth and the ending lines. But of all the songs, I come back to it the least. We see suicide as a logical problem to solve. When a person faces loss in their perception, whether as disposable of a job or career, or as personal as a pet or loved one, people can desire to die. Because they caught a glimpse of what not is and still can't process it. Because we don't exist to die, we can't properly conceive of not existing. This article discusses not just suicide, but the nature of depression, death, and the world we don't see. We hear the possibility of something more, but in the realm of scientific reason, we have to reject it until something else is placed on the table. All suicidal people are depressed because depression leads to suicide. Therefore, no person who committed suicide is happy because happiness is not suicidal. We cannot process a person who acts without personhood. Vur, in the final paragraph, admits he is truly unwell and does not belong. He believes he, through his rituals and studies, brings a horrible rot into the world. As Barrett writes, he put on the device after an attempt to die, and through the device sought answers, and instead he got something worse. As a cult leader, he craved attention. He wanted the same love and respect every person desires and aimed to create a society that would avoid these things, as all cult leaders aim to do. He fixated on death as a framing to find meaning in the meaningless world because we believe in meaning. We exist for a reason. We die for a reason. However, Barrett writes that suicide is not self-harm, but world harm. Quote, an attack on the universe. Vur's Dark Ocean Society clinged on to the devices and would wear them constantly to connect with death, to exist without thought in any way, to become numb to the hostilities of the world they didn't fit in. The device numbed your senses, restricted your breathing, and kept you isolated in a small tank. You lose touch with the real world by wearing it, depriving yourself of the physical reality to find an escape with the silence and death. Barrett writes that these men wore the device so often, clued to a fragile connection with the outside world. Their mental suicide was an attempt to live with the dead, while not cutting ties with the reality they were used to. I don't completely agree with the idea of suicide as revenge, but I do think that at a certain point, since we are people, suicide is a personal act, as is any act. When you do not crave life, you stop trying to preserve it and thus attempt to end it. You convince yourself that suicide is survival. Old Worm is a large poem subtitled, A Portrait of My Life Without Me in It. Barrett describes his life detached from himself. The thoughts are written like poetic descriptions rather than thoughtful prose. He returns to shut out the light, isolates and floods himself with self-hatred. No one cares about him, not a single soul would dare to speak to him, and at every point, that emptiness rises back out. In anger, despair, sadness, emptiness, sulking, and rage, he tells himself to erase every inch of himself in this mental cycle of hurt. The poem breaks out of the shackles of prose and theory and slams down to the reality of Barrett's empty life, alone and trapped in his worst temptations, which stack and reinforce themselves over and over. The closing track, Buried Above Ground, plays like a tune out of a festival. The song builds up with a catchy melody with dragged-out strings. I've always heard the jingling chimes, strings, and bells like that of a traveling group of people parading around, probably with a body, as the album ends with accepting that stagnation, a mummer's dance of death. Instrumentals coming in one by one, building up carefully to that wide reprise and orchestra, returning back to the haunted presence. The song bursts into a celebration of the devil which controls them. The horns return with a persistent drum like that of a marching band. The singer returns with a more celebratory, accepting tone in the demons which consume them, surrounded by voices and horns as they find light in the dark. They repeat the lines of being a child stuck in a well, a man pacing a prison cell, waiting for their moment again and again. Trapped in this hell, but it's their hell. Prepared in this loop to continue this repetition indefinitely, ending with the line, "I am buried above ground." The song plays out. I don't think I need to explain that final line, honestly. At best, they're still the same ghost they're trapped in. At worst, they're in hell, and hell is here. But it's theirs, and they'll live with it. They lived another day, they survived the lowest moment, and maybe they'll keep doing it. As Barrett writes in the final chapter, Giles Corey, that the title, and the man himself, never pled guilty. He said nothing on trial. He refused to take part in the system and, as a result, was punished for his inability to be tried. Because by pleading in the trial, Corey would be validating the witch trials as jurisdiction, that his accusation, random and bizarre as they were, was a normal part of the human process, and by refusing to participate or acknowledge their hurt, the villagers chose to dehumanize him and torture him for a plea, which he never gave. Barrett writes about his fear that the others, the people around, despised him for his antisocial behavior, for his inability to conform into the society at large. He notes that everyone lives in a world detached from the weight of life. Everyone seems to have an answer. The fear that he is truly alone and the world at large is fake. That he suffers alone regardless because the world is not his. Because this world is not his. He is the imposter in it that the others dream to remove him from. He pulls himself out of that terror and, when out of the mindset, speaks this isn't his world. There is a better world. He can create that better world. Quote, "In my world there are no stones, there is no circle, there's no stick, no tongue, no gallows, and no misery, and no death. Their world is not this world." The devil in the haunted presence and buried above ground, the rocks that crushed down Giles Corey, the sins of his silence, that his torture does not bother him. By the weight of this contrast, the will to live and the will to die, Barrett writes through his conclusion of Vur and the misery of his life, quote, "And I am crushed, utterly crushed. And then I get up." If I can break for a moment, I find this novel really cool, or novella, far more interesting than the deconstructionist one. I feel like it has such a deep fascination with the psyche of human society, the violence in it, and in the moments we declare those actions correct and whatnot. The story Barrett tells, true or not, of his childhood self being violently bullied by one person, and when his choice was to fight back, he is reprimanded and dehumanized, as if the expectation was he would stand by and never fight back, no matter the escalation. For Giles Corey, the expectation was that he would walk into his death. The trial was barely about the abuse of the accuser, as if Americans ever gave a shit about that. It was about getting rid of the outsiders in Salem. It was about punishing the people who did not fit in with the paradigm, to create some special paradise for the people who suffered in Salem, pinning the blame not to any aspect of the world around or to the society that ruled over them so far away, but to the people the village hated the most. Giles Corey refused to participate, so they tortured him, so they could kill him honorably, without it being seen as murder. As Barrett writes, their world is not his world, and he can change his world. The writings of Depression are so on point to my own thoughts and mindsets that have been plaguing me my whole life, that have been plaguing my family members and my friends, about feeling alone in the world, about feeling disconnected and targeted by the people we're trapped with. And then I feel a little bit better, and life goes on. The whole biographical connections between Robert Vore and Dan Barrett are fascinating too. This cult leader was born out of a fascination with his disconnection to people, studying the barrier between life and death, unfit for the mainstreams of society, until they become fish swimming in a tank, analogous to swimming through the streams of death as they slowly killed themselves. We watched them from the outside, unsure of the years of hazing that locked them down in this death spiral, erasing their existence to vanish from the world truly. Despite not existing, I still feel like this person and this cult was real, because of how much history is written down, how well it's written, how many people we don't think about or don't remember, like Martha Corey, who actually stood up against the trials quite early, painting her as a target for the accusers and the village at large. The expectation is that people fit into roles, murderers and murdered, bully and bullied. At no point do we give pause to the people who remove themselves violently from the world because of the difficulty in removing the rot from who we are. That was a bit ruthless. It's hard to conclude with this album. That's not to say the people who are hurt weren't hurt, but we're always so used to just finding answers. We don't reconcile with the people and how they lose it, or the people who are truly hurting and what we're not doing for them. Hold up. If Robert Vore isn't real, then how did Dan Barrett put on the device? Plot hole. Zing. Ping. Well, to be blunt, the only difference in the piano meltdown was that instead of a device, it was a hood. It's in the Deconstructionist PDF file. I hate the internet. Robert Vore is the fictionalized metaphorical and motif for the themes of the album, the obsession with the beyond and the deaths we obsess over. Vore was an outsider who preyed on the fascination with the beyond, toying with people and the divide between the living and the dead, before he locked in on the nature of life itself, transferring his real physical self into a non-physical death through writing and ritual. The Vore's device was nothing more than a cloak, but to the Dark Ocean Society, it was their connection to the dead. Away from the humanity they were excluded from, they found parse and comfort in their cult. Do any of us actually conform because we belong, or because we learn to? Even though the man probably wasn't real, there's a real connection to Barrett and Have a Nice Life. Tim Akuga and Dan Barrett in Have a Nice Life in many ways were Robert Vore. Well, obviously metaphorically, but let me fucking talk, you bitch. They were the cult leaders who brought a form of post-rock and post-punk that philosophically dissected the darkness of the human mind. Tim Akuga would later move to noise music, trying to express this sense of pain and death and afterlife in the Flowers of St. Francis. And Dan Barrett would move to this folky atmospheric music in Blackwing, even making whole sermons about the human condition.
You just have to get
thoughts on my personal map. Things I want to be, things I want to do.
And in many ways, their fans are the Dark Ocean Society, cloaking themselves in the illusion that they're really glimpsing into something when we're really all just empty and confused and scared and angry at each other all the fucking time. The Dark Ocean Society doesn't have to exist. Robert Vore didn't have to make the Vore head device, and we don't get to talk to ghosts or see a glimpse into the beyond. We just keep wishing that we'll find a meaning eventually. I've always admired the destitution brought by this album. I think what Giles Corey succeeds at the most is how good it is at describing what depression feels like. And I don't just mean the kind of emotionless mind fog it feels like at its bleakest, but instead the dynamic of it. Depression always starts with some kind of traumatizing experience that opens up your mind to a side that your reality didn't perceive. You become trapped in the fear of this, that your life has always been a thin line between comfort and death. It starts out small. Oh, I don't like this as much anymore. Or this. Or this. Till the only thing you enjoy is lying on your side staring at a wall. Every tiny inconvenience, every horrible memory, every failure to break the cycle justifies the descent. Suicidal thoughts go from brief terrors toiled by the darkest of your psyche to casual thoughts of getting out. I have to admit here, especially after 2023, I have not been able to claw out of a dismal mindset that has led me to feel hopeful for the end. Those episodes of mind death I fell into during that winter of 2020, through the first few months of 2021 were hell. I had no motivation to live, no will to write, and barely got out of bed to eat. I went from writing entire chapters of my stories to writing a quarter of a paragraph. Sparked by a peek into the grief and trauma of an infamous historical figure in hallucination, transformed into a melted combination of emptiness, self-loathing, heartbreak, and hatred, brought into casual suicide, derealization, and mental turmoil that turns into a biting animal before the cycle repeats. It understands that the worst part of depression is that only you know it's happening, and paradoxically, you can't do anything to get out of it until the fog moves away. No one else knows you're suffering until you're hurt or you hurt. It doesn't take long to sever your ties to everyone else. Giles Corey, the album, is the shadow of a person consuming them, left to wither and fade out as their own misery consumes them, the culmination of trauma and failure which breaks the narrator, through the haunted voices beyond the living barrier, through the nihilism that permeates from their darker perspective. As life always dies at every point, fraught with grief and heartbreak, shock and heartache, disappointed by the world and the obvious complexities that seem ignored by others, crushed down by the weight of it all, they toil with suicide, drown in the meaning people will take from their end, soak in bitterness and contempt for the world that fails them, before ultimately succumbing to the depressed reality that life just goes on. They live another day, another ruthless day. When I was at my lowest, this and U-Void Synthesizer were the only albums I listened to for 3 months. It perfectly taps into what abandonment and lovelessness feels like. I don't have the answers to any problems, to any feelings of despair. People are giving up because of how hard the forces press down. No one's really there to pull them back up either. I don't have the answer for you because, well, like my dad, I'm a bit useless. I can't tell you what to do. My own life is in a death spiral, and I don't really know what to do besides fall. There are people out there who have much worse than me, and I cannot fucking imagine what they're doing. I can barely even imagine a future past a few months from now. At the end of How Fish is Made, there's a quote about the monotony of "you're not alone." How true it is, but how diminishing it feels when people say it, to decentralize your suffering into the reality that all of humankind suffers. They acknowledge it, and then the game ends. Life is either marching on to have your soul consumed by grief and torture, or taking your own path at the cost of unity. You either join the wave or drown beneath it. I said at the end of my video on endless longing that, both to someone else and myself, that you're gonna make it. There are people on this planet who have it absolutely awful, far worse than I. There are also people who have everything, but still feel empty and unloved. I don't know you, and I will never know you. The one thing we have in common is that one day we will all be buried underground. Until then, we enjoy being buried above it. Everything inevitably goes away. I think the album's point is that, well, at least my guess is, Barrett survived. He survived that low point. He lived another day. And he called out to someone else and told them that they're going to make it too. You do with that what you will.